No one could believe how this MVP race ended. It was one of the most competitive, entertaining, and controversial finishes ever. The players that are voted in the top 5 were playing at a high level. We're going to discuss the regular season performances of Glen Rice, Tim Hardaway, Grant Hill, Michael Jordan, and Karl Malone. We're going to start with the 5th place and finish with the MVP winner. Make sure to comment on your take on who was the most deserving. There are some players that when they get hot from the field, it can last for games at a time. Some players can stay hot for an entire month. You think of iconic scorers like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, or James Harden. You would never think to put Glen Rice in that exclusive club. But in 1997, he went 3 straight months of scoring in a manner that we've never seen before. Let's start by giving you all some context. In the previous year, the Charlotte Hornets were the definition of a mediocre team. They traded their star center, Alonzo Mourning, right before the first game of the season. In return, they received Glen Rice, among other pieces. For many people, this was considered a big downgrade. They struggled in his first year there, and they went 41-41. In the offseason, they traded all-star forward Larry Johnson for Anthony Mason. It seemed like this team was going backwards, and their record reflected that. After a game against the Sacramento Kings on January 12th, they had a 19-16 record, and they were just holding on to the 8th seed. At that moment, something clicked. Glen Rice went into this groove that lasted for the entire season. For the next 3 months, or a 47-game sample, this is what he averaged: 29.7 points per game on 50% shooting. But that's not the crazy part. This dude averaged 49% from the 3. He was attempting 5.7 3-point shots a game. Just for context, that's the same amount that Cade Cunningham and Jaylen Brown averaged in the 2026 season, and they both shot under 35%. I'm not going to hide the fact that this occurred during a very brief era where the 3-point line was shortened. It went from 23 feet 9 inches to a uniform 22 feet around the basket. But come on, shooting nearly 50% from 22 feet out for over half a season is crazy. That's what made Glen Rice so special. He was one of the most accurate shooters that I've ever witnessed. He wasn't a fancy one-on-one scorer. He didn't have crazy ball handling skills, but he was very underrated in the post, and on the outside, he just needed a little bit of space, just a tiny bit of daylight. That's all he needed to score at a very efficient rate. There are many examples that prove his shooting greatness. There were 7 games that season where he scored over 40 points. In 4 of those games, he shot over 60% from the field. For the other 3, he shot over 50%. Among those 40-point performances was the game against the Boston Celtics. That's when he did this.
All sorts of open men, but never looks. Rice. Here comes Smith, out to Rice. Bang! Wow. Mason. Well, Todd Day, there's that pick. Rice off the pick.
He ended the game with 48 points on 67% shooting. He went 5 of 8 from the 3, and he added 4 rebounds. That was his best statistical performance. But his most memorable was the 1997 All-Star Game. That's when he won the All-Star Game MVP. Everyone remembers what he did. He scored 20 of his 26 points in the 3rd quarter. It was an incredible shooting display. He used the national stage to prove just how special of a season he was having. Thankfully, people started paying attention. During that incredible 47-game span, the Hornets went 35-12. They finished the season with a 54-28 record, which was tied for the 5th best record in the East. Believe it or not, this still holds the record for the most wins in franchise history. They couldn't have accomplished this without his supremely underrated play. For the year, he averaged 26.8 points on 48% shooting, 4 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. He also shot a league best 47% from the 3. Among players that averaged at least 5 3-point attempts per game, that is the 8th highest mark ever. It's no wonder they finished in the top 5 in MVP voting. He was mainly responsible for a team that improved by 13 wins. When discussing the greatest players of the 90s, his name hardly gets mentioned. But in this current era, where the 3-point shot is king, this season should get so much more love. The Miami Heat seemed to be one piece away from being a true contender. They had their star center that they acquired through a trade. They had a true mastermind and one of the greatest coaches of all time, and they had a dominant defense. All that they were missing was a playmaker, someone who could create for himself and others, someone who was a cold-blooded closer. They got all of the above with Tim Hardaway. He was acquired in the middle of the 1995-96 season. After getting through that transition period, he was ready to fully acclimate himself. For many people, he was a driving force behind their overachieving season. He was a team leader in points, assists, and steals. He averaged 20.3 points on 42% shooting, 8.6 assists, 3.4 rebounds, and 1.9 steals per game. Those numbers might not seem impressive for some. After all, there are so many point guards in today's league that are scoring at a much higher rate. But remember, this was a different time in a much different era. As you can see, the only point guard throughout the entire 90s to average over 25 points per game was Michael Adams in 1991. Point guards were rarely the first scoring option, and it was even more rare that they were among the top scoring threats in the league. For his time, the numbers that Hardaway was producing were elite. This was even more impressive if you consider the circumstances. He missed the entire 1993-94 season after tearing his ACL. In his return, he wasn't the same explosive player. In fact, he was snubbed from making the All-Star team for the next 2 seasons. There were doubts that he would ever return to being an All-NBA caliber player. He answered all the doubters in a major way. He might have lost some of his athleticism and quickness, but he improved in other aspects. For example, this is what he told the Sun Sentinel: "I'm playing more and more defense, and we're playing more defense as a team. One-on-one, I think I'm keeping my man in front of me and making sure he's not going to the hole." End of quote. He transformed into a more complete player. But make no mistake about it, there were moments where he showcased his individual greatness. Take for example his monster performance against the Washington Bullets. He had 45 points on 52% shooting, 7 rebounds, 7 assists, and 4 steals. He also went 6 of 12 from the 3 during their thrilling overtime victory. He was more than capable of taking over games, and the Miami Heat benefited greatly. They won 61 games. That was the second best record in the East and the third best overall. That was a 19-game improvement from the previous year. This is also only the second time that the Heat has ever won over 60 games. The value that he brought to this team was undeniable. He not only finished 4th in MVP voting, but he was also selected to the All-NBA first team. He finished ahead of point guards Gary Payton and John Stockton. The accolades that he received were well deserved. For many basketball fans, it was great to see him back on top. Grant Hill's level of play was so high that there was only one player that he could be compared to: Michael Jordan. He was only in his 3rd season, but the NBA world knew there was something special brewing. His skill and talent were already exceptional, comparable to some of the all-time greats. We never got to see the best of Grant Hill, and we all still remember how great a player he was during this time. His peak was sensational. In the 1996-97 season, we got to see his individual greatness and how he could carry a team to an overachieving season. They were going to need him to do a lot of the heavy lifting after the Pistons received some discouraging news. The young and promising Allen Houston signed with the New York Knicks. On paper, this team got worse. There didn't seem to be much hope in Detroit. But as the season started, this team couldn't stop winning. They started the first 10 games with a 9-1 record. They were able to ride that momentum up to the All-Star break. By that time, they had the 3rd best record in the East. They were only 2 games behind the Miami Heat. The secret to their success was the greatness and versatility of Grant Hill. He was someone who could play point guard, shooting guard, and small forward effectively. For the 2nd straight year, he led the team in points, rebounds, and assists. At the time, he was only one of 3 players to lead their team in those 3 categories more than once. He joined the company of Wilt Chamberlain and Elgin Baylor. He was arguably the best all-around player in the game. The proof is in the numbers. He averaged 21.4 points on nearly 50% shooting, 9 rebounds, 7.3 assists, and 1.8 steals per game. Up to that point, only Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain, John Havlicek, and Larry Bird were able to record at least 21 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists per game for a season. He also had 13 triple-doubles, which was a number that wasn't surpassed for years until Russell Westbrook came along. There were hardly any holes in his game. He was a vicious rebounder, an exquisite passer, and he killed opponents by covering the passing lanes. As far as scoring, no one was more explosive. He had tremendous ball handling abilities and a killer first step. Once he got by his man, his mission was to posterize the opposing centers. This guy was a force of nature. It's hard to find a big man who wasn't a victim of a poster dunk from G Money. Although he wasn't a great three-point shooter, he had developed a reliable mid-range shot. According to Basketball Reference, he was shooting 49.8% from 16 feet to three-point range. If you were worried about the drive, he would make you pay. Michael Wilbon wrote an interesting article about him for the Washington Post in '97. He said that he's no longer a star in the making. In pure and simple terms of basketball dominance, one man's ability to affect the outcome of a game, he surpassed Shaquille O'Neal, surpassed Penny Hardaway, surpassed Hakeem Olajuwon, surpassed Charles Barkley, and surpassed even the all-around ability of Scottie Pippen. If you could pick anybody you wanted from the NBA talent pool, here's the way the draft ought to be conducted. Number 1, Michael Jordan. Number 2, Grant Hill. This was not considered a hot take. He was already that good. There was even a New York Times article that year where the headline was calling him the next Michael Jordan. It's no accident that he finished right behind him in the MVP race. He finished in 3rd place. Late in the season, he proved to the world that he was worthy of those comparisons. They were hosting the Chicago Bulls, and Grant Hill proceeded to do this.
Here's 4th all the way, and Hill slams it home. 3-2. Magic Johnson, his 4th gets down, it counts, and the foul. That foul on Pippen is 1st. Oh, what a feint by Hill. Deeper and deeper, that time had him in the backcourt, but it has not bothered Hill. Yes, by Williams, here's Dumas, 3-on-1, and it's Hill finishing it off.
It was a magnificent all-around performance. He led his team to a 108-91 victory. He picked apart this juggernaut by doing a little bit of everything. He finished with 27 points on 48% shooting, 12 rebounds, 10 assists, and 1 steal. He broke down the defense by driving to the lane and creating easy shots for his teammates. The Pistons were also an excellent pick-and-roll team, largely thanks to Hill. If you're wondering what he was going to do next, he would burn you with a mid-range jumper. Let's not forget that he had an elite defender guarding him, Scottie Pippen, but it didn't matter. The Bulls were looking to achieve back-to-back 70-win seasons, and he just wouldn't let them. But that's not the only performance worth mentioning. His most memorable one came against the Los Angeles Lakers. This might have been the first glimpse of what Kobe and Shaq would end up doing to the league. The rookie ended up with 21 points on 62% shooting, while Shaq had 18 points, 19 rebounds, and 5 blocks. But Grant Hill ruined their coming out party. He had 34 points on 52% shooting, 15 rebounds, 14 assists, and 1 steal. In the 4th quarter, he put his team on his back and had 15 points in the period. But nothing was bigger than when he made this shot that sent the game to overtime. Thanks to his clutch play, they eventually won the game in the 2nd overtime. Thanks to his dominant performance, the Pistons secured the 5th seed and finished with 54 wins. It was the most they had won since their 1990 title season. It was a great accomplishment for a team that didn't have high expectations to begin with. If we remember what Steve Smith said, they didn't exactly have a strong team. Their second leading scorer was Joe Dumars, who was considering retirement before the season began. The rest of the roster consisted of fine role players like Lindsey Hunter, Terry Mills, Aaron McKee, and Theo Radcliffe. Then there was Otis Thorpe. He did bring some championship experience, but he was also causing a lot of distractions. He had a disagreement with Doug Collins in early February, and he was called out in front of the team. He was also upset that he wasn't being involved in the offense more. It got to the point where he wouldn't acknowledge Doug, and he would ignore him during huddles. This played a big part in their struggles in the last part of the season. In their last 20 games, they went 9-11. It was a disappointment considering how strong they started the year. We already established that this was Hill's peak season. but he still had more room to improve. If only his body didn't betray him, then who knows what else he could have accomplished in his career. Michael Jordan was the king again. In his first full season back from his first retirement, he did the impossible. He led his team to 72 wins. He won the MVP, scoring title, All-Star Game MVP, and Finals MVP. He shut up every single one of his doubters in a way we've never seen before. You would think that the NBA world had learned their lesson. Just don't say anything negative about the GOAT. Unless, of course, you were taking this season away to draft Tim Duncan. Other than that, he would make it his mission to make you pay. But throughout the season, there was a recurring theme. Whenever he had a high-scoring game, it was because one of his opponents said something, and he used that fuel to completely destroy them. The most famous story to come out of this season came against the New York Knicks. He was angered after hearing what Jeff Van Gundy said about him. He implied that Jordan befriends opponents and uses it to his advantage during games. This was the exact quote. He sucks them into thinking that he wants to see them develop. He talks about young players. He invites people to be in his movies, and it's all a con. End of quote. So Jordan responded to the challenge the way he knows best, by completely annihilating the number 2 rated defense in the league. He scored a season-high 51 points on 60% shooting. How do we know that he was motivated by those remarks? After reaching the 51-point mark, he yelled at Jeff some choice words, as MJ put it. Then we have his next 50-point performance, which came against the number 1 rated defensive team, the Miami Heat. It was reported that Tim Hardaway told a newspaper that he was going to avenge a loss that they had against a whole other team. Scottie Pippen said, according to ESPN, Jordan came out as a personal challenge from Hardaway. Whether he admits it or not, he saw what was written in the paper. End of quote. Michael responded by scoring 50 points on 55% shooting. Then there was the game against the Seattle Supersonics. George Karl said that Jordan had given up going inside. It looked like he was trying not to get hurt. Sounds like a harmless observation, right? There's even some seasoned Bulls observers that acknowledged that what Karl said was true. This is according to the Spokesman Review. However, Michael took that as a challenge, and he responded by scoring 45 points on 68% shooting. The vast majority of the shots he took were all from the outside. They were mostly highly contested jumpers, just to stick it to George. It's no coincidence these were his 3 highest scoring games of the year. So after all these examples, there was one player who expressed the type of fear that many players had for this killer. The Bulls were set to play the Washington Bullets. The storyline was that Jordan failed to lead the team in scoring in back-to-back games. This is what Juwan Howard said when asked for his comment. "That doesn't mean anything. You guys are not going to get me talking about him." End of quote. This is what Michael did to himself to play at the highest level. He was not going to allow his team to lose that fire and that edge that drove them to win 72 games. Every game needed to be a battle. If they got complacent, then they would have had a mediocre season like so many other teams do after winning a championship. He set the example by taking every game as a personal challenge. This was the reason why the Chicago Bulls were just as good as their legendary 1995-96 season. This is also considering that Dennis Rodman missed 27 total games from the various on-the-court and off-the-court issues he was dealing with. Tony Kukoc missed 25 games, and Luke Longley missed 23 games. That is a total of 75 games that their 3 best front-court players missed. Their biggest weakness was already their front line, and for a large portion of the season, they were using their backups. And they still won, the 3rd most games in the history of the league. How was that possible? This is what Jack McCallum wrote for Sports Illustrated. Of course, the Bulls have one huge advantage. Jordan could bail out any offense. But with the exception of Tony Kukoc, it's doubtful that any of Chicago's role players, Steve Kerr, Luke Longley, Bill Wennington, even Rodman, would be more productive playing on any other team. End of quote. This was the same famous article where he was questioning if Chicago's supremacy was good or bad for the NBA. This team was going through a lot of injuries from key players and internal problems that Rodman was causing, but none of it mattered because they had Michael Jordan. Of course, the foundation that was placed in the triangle offense allowed this team to be very proficient on both ends of the floor, but MJ was the key to everything. The ultimate example of everything that he brought to the table came against the Charlotte Hornets. That's when he did this.
Steve Kerr in the ballgame now for Scottie Pippen. Here's Jordan over Anthony Mason for the fourth lead change in the first quarter. Jordan back the other way. Player for a day, get paid like one. $25,000. Mike Kerr looking for Rodman inside, gives it to Jordan on the reverse. Jordan with 2 seconds left. Jordan to win.
Michael Jordan being Michael Jordan.
He ended the game with 43 points on 67% shooting, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 steals. Scottie Pippen only had 5 points on 2 of 13 shooting, but it didn't matter. There were plenty of games like these where he carried his team, but somehow, some way, he was not the consensus MVP. How idiotic is that? They gave the award to Karl Malone, who didn't have a single case of winning the MVP over Jordan. Let's look at the numbers. He averaged 29.6 points on 48% shooting, 5.9 rebounds, 4.3 assists, and 1.7 steals per game. He led the league in scoring, win shares, offensive win shares per 48 minutes, value over replacement player rating, box plus minus, and offensive box plus minus. Oh, I almost forgot. The Bulls had a better record than the Utah Jazz. This was an abomination. He was 100% robbed of winning the MVP. With everything that we learned about how Jordan responds to the slightest things that are said about him, can you imagine what was going through his head when he found out that he didn't win the MVP? I can assure you that everything that he accomplished in that legendary final series was motivated by the most foolish MVP decision in modern day history. But as always, he had the last laugh. For the record, we're not going to hold against Karl Malone that the media voted for him as the MVP. He didn't put a gun to their heads and force all 63 of those people to vote for him. It's not his fault that they decided to go against logic and vote for a different player just because it felt like it. This is unquestionably Malone's most valuable season. By all accounts, this is the year where Karl impacted the Utah Jazz the most. He recorded the highest win shares per 48 minutes, value over replacement player rating, box plus minus, offensive box plus minus, and PER of his career. He led the Jazz to a franchise best 64 wins. It's a number that only 28 other teams have been able to reach. They also had a margin of victory of 8.79 points, which is currently the 30th highest for a single season. This was a historically dominant team, and Malone was getting most of the credit. According to the New York Times, his team has 64 victories, and he is responsible for about 60 of them. And according to David Aldridge of ESPN, the Jazz were the best team in the league in the second half, and Malone was the main reason why. There was some truth to that. After the All-Star break, Malone averaged a combined 28 points on 58% shooting, 8.5 rebounds, and 4.3 assists for that 35-game span leading up to the playoffs. The Jazz went 31-4, which included a 15-game winning streak. They were the hottest team, and he was getting national attention, especially with the type of games that he was having. The one performance that stands out came against the Golden State Warriors. That's when he proceeded to do this.
There goes Karl, all the way to the basket, and he rattles it down. Free throw has yet to get his first field goal. Joe, good pass. Felton does not finish for Utah. Karl Malone feeds Ostertag for Karl Malone. He shouldn't foul now. It's too late. They've done a good job pushing him out. Stockton goes through. Karl the step back. Karl Malone.
He ended the game with 41 points on 64% shooting, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals. In the following game, they went on to beat the Dallas Mavericks by 31 points. He followed that up with another 41-point performance against the Detroit Pistons. His scoring ability has always been considered his biggest strength, and rightfully so. He ranks 3rd all-time in scoring for a reason. But one aspect that he improved on was his playmaking abilities. He was very adept at passing out of the double team with all the attention he would receive on the block. His unselfish nature played a role in the success the Jazz had on the offensive end. They finished second in both scoring and offensive rating. This perfectly illustrates that the mailman was much more than just a scorer. He was a very underrated all-around big man. Take a look at the numbers he posted for the season. 27.4 points on 55% shooting, 9.9 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. But what's even more impressive is that he did all of this at the age of 33, which is the third oldest age to win the MVP. That is a testament to his greatness. It's amazing that he continued to physically impose his will despite his advanced age, that he was averaging just as many points and was as efficient as when he was in his 20s, that he was one of the 3 best players in the world at that stage of his career. Only the best of the best could make that claim, and Karl Malone's dedication and work ethic allowed him to continue playing at an MVP level for 10 years straight. When we take that into context, the maturity in his game and the way he ended the season, I can understand why the league voters were so impressed, and they compensated him greatly. For example, this is what Larry Miller of the Deseret News wrote after it was announced that he won the MVP. I believe that Karl Malone has played like a man with a mission all year long. He has learned how not to just put up big numbers, which he has done all his career, but now how to win games. His focus has been laser-like. He deserves to be the MVP. End of quote. Now you may be thinking, that's a very biased observation from a Salt Lake City newspaper. Of course he's going to say that Karl Malone deserved to be the MVP. As we all know, they weren't the only ones that thought that way, and they made sure to include the other national sports writers that shared the same sentiment. Here's a list of quotes that they gathered from one of their articles that year. Chicago would be fine without Jordan, but the Jazz would be a lottery team without Malone. This was said by Glen Rice of the San Antonio Express News. I felt it was about time he got honored, sort of a Lifetime Achievement Award. This was said by Houston television broadcaster Bill Worrell. But now we get to the good stuff. Kent McDill of the Chicago Daily News said, "I just got tired of voting for Michael." And finally, Richie Witt of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram said, "Whether people want to admit it or not, Jordan slept a little bit this year. Malone was there every night." Lord have mercy. How do we allow the national sports writers to get away with this? I'm not trying to say that Karl Malone did not have an MVP-worthy season. In a non-Michael Jordan year, he probably wins the award 9 out of 10 times. He was undoubtedly the best player of one of the most dominant regular season teams ever. That's an achievement that deserves plenty of recognition. And the fact that they made the finals proves that this was a great season by the mailman. But I strongly believe that they got this wrong. But what about you all? Who would you have voted for? Do you think they got the top 5 players right? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.